My name is David Bergman, and I'm going to be your guide on a journey from hell to freedom. I am qualified to be your guide because I have taken this journey before. I was lucky to have survived. But for millions of other people, it was a one-way journey because they were murdered by the Nazis. The method used for the killings were poisonous gas, starvation, torture, and many other cruel methods. You will see and hear how the Nazis in Germany and in many other countries in Europe murdered millions of innocent Jewish children and adults simply because they were Jewish. It should be remembered the Nazis also murdered millions of Christians that were against Nazism or were considered undesirable, such as gypsies and others considered unfit for work. The sounds of the trains that you will hear are the sounds that brought terror and fear into the hearts of millions of victims confronted by Nazi tyranny. Because the sound of a hissing steam engine meant to be taken away from home and sent to a concentration camp or an extermination camp. I would like to emphasize at this time that this is not a made-up story of mine, nor of someone else's imagination. What you will see and hear is what I saw and experienced. It is a duty and obligation of everyone who believes in freedom and justice for all people to make sure the truth is passed on from generation to generation, so that the millions of Jewish and Christian lives destroyed under Nazi tyranny will never be forgotten, and that their memory will serve as a reminder that tyranny will destroy anyone or anything that opposes it. I saw it happen, and if we allow it, it can happen again. And now, come along with me on this epic journey. It will be a short journey, but you will remember it for a lifetime. I was born in a small town in the Carpathian Mountains called Bochco, a province of Czechoslovakia. It was a happy place. We all respected each other's religions and way of life. In 1944, when I was only 12 years old, we were taken from our homes by the vicious Nazis from Hungary and Germany. Being so young, I had no idea what it was all about, but I remember my parents telling me that the exile will only be for a short time, and that soon everything will be just like it was before. The Hungarian Gestapo put a seal on our doors and told us that when we returned home, the house would be returned to us. I believe that most Jewish people in town really thought we would return. We had never harmed anyone, so why should anyone want to harm us? We were strong believers in God and believed that what was happening was His will, and He would see to it that we would soon return. Shortly afterwards, we were taken to a processing camp in Hungary called Matisalka. The camp was controlled by the Hungarian Gestapo, who were displaying their viciousness for all to see. A couple of men were caught trying to escape. Their punishment consisted of having their hands tied behind their back until their feet were just a couple of inches off the ground. They were held in that position until they passed out. They were revived by having water poured over their heads and then lowered to the ground for a few minutes. As soon as they revived, the rope was raised again, and they were held like that until they passed out again. This torture was repeated several times. We were forced to wash this so that we would be aware of what would happen to anyone who tried to escape. After a few weeks at Matisalka, we were again put into cattle trains, so crowded that we could not move. And then they locked the doors. We were not told where we were going or how long the trip would last. Hungarian guards were replaced with German guards. After a few days of traveling without food or water, the train slowed down. I noticed a huge barbed wire enclosure with many barracks and buildings with large smokestacks. I could not understand why so many smokestacks were needed. None of us knew what the smokestacks were used for, but we soon found out. As the train proceeded deeper and deeper into the barbed wire complex, we all began to suspect that something was wrong. We were hoping to be taken to some city in Hungary, but this did not look like a city. The train came to a stop, and suddenly it felt like lightning had struck. We were in Auschwitz. After we got off the train at Auschwitz, we were made aware of the brutality of the Nazi guards. As soon as we were inside the gates of Auschwitz, the Nazis showed their viciousness. We saw able-bodied men going in one direction, able-bodied women in another direction, and children and older people in yet another direction. The suddenness of separation was a shock. No one had any warning. Mothers and fathers who tried to go after their children were severely beaten by the Nazis, and if they still resisted, were immediately shot. Children tried to run to their parents, but were taken back forcibly by the brutal guards. It was a scene that you need to see only once in a lifetime, and it remains engraved in your mind and heart forever. A few hundred feet from the train, I saw a Nazi officer flanked by guards, barking out orders, directing people to their lines. With a flick of a hand, a person's fate was sealed. Who shall live, and who shall die? We did not know why we were separated. We were told that we would be kept together and soon return home. The separation happened very fast. My mother went in one direction, my brother and sister in another. I did not even have a chance to say goodbye to them. Somehow, I was put with an adult group and managed to stay together with my father. As I stood awaiting the judgment of the Nazi officer, he asked me how old I was. I was about to say that I was 12, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear, so I did not say anything. My father, realizing what was happening, said that I was 14. The Nazi officer paused for a moment, looked me over, and motioned with his right arm, ordering me to go where the adults were going. Had I said that I was only 12 years old, I would have gone with the other children. The children and older people were put into a building and told to take a shower. Without warning, a poisonous gas was turned on. There was a brief struggle for air, then death. This was one of the many methods used to destroy the Jewish people. This is what millions of Jewish people faced day in and day out from 1941 to 1945. 5 of the most unbelievable years in the history of human cruelty. After the separation, we were stripped of all of our clothing and belongings. We were warned that if any valuables were found on us, we would be put to death. Shock and fear came over me. A while ago, I had been playing with other children. discussing school, preparing for my bar mitzvah. And now, here I was, struggling for survival in Auschwitz. As we moved deeper and deeper into the huge camp, we were confronted with high barbed wire fences and towers. Looking up at the guards, I kept asking myself, why are they doing this to us? We never harmed anyone. What become of our family? Will I ever see my mother, my sister, and my brother again? We were not allowed near the gas chambers. I used to ask my father, what is that terrible smell? But he wouldn't tell me. People who had been in prison for some time told us what the Nazis had done with the children and elderly people. From Auschwitz, my father and I were put on a cattle train and taken to a concentration camp in Poland called Plaszow. Fortunately, I was able to stay with my father again. He worked at his profession as a tailor, and I worked as a bricklayer. I had never laid a brick or stone on a wall before, but I learned fast that the secret for survival was hard work. If you could not produce, you were sent to the gas chamber. Each of us had to build a 5-foot by 4-foot wall every day. If we did not complete the wall on time, we did not get any food. Many people died from starvation and torture because they could not complete the wall on time. The walls were built from stones mined from a rocky mountain. The laying of stones would not have been so bad, but we had to carry every stone by hand from the mine to the area where we were building the wall. It was fruitless work because we did not accomplish much. For us, though, it was not a question of accomplishment, but rather of living or dying. The concentration camp included many different nationalities and religions. There were Jews, Poles, Gypsies, Hungarians, and Russians. There were even criminals there who were serving time for some crime they had committed. I remember working with one of those criminals. One day, while we were mixing cement together, he told me that he was going to be released the following day. I couldn't believe it when I saw him leaving the camp later, a free man. I was so envious. There was no time limit for my internment in the concentration camp. Only death would be the limit. Our only hope lay in being liberated by the Russians who were fighting on the Eastern Front. We used to hear the guns in the distance, but we didn't know which side was winning. When I got back from work one evening, and without any warning, I was suddenly dragged into a wire fence enclosure with other men. We were told that we would be shipped out that evening. I did not see my father, but somehow my father found me, and we were able to say goodbye through the fence. That evening, we were put into cattle trains and sent to another concentration camp called Gross-Rosen. Gross-Rosen was a processing camp for providing manpower for the concentration camps that were located throughout Germany and Poland. After we arrived, we were warned about the severe penalties for escaping. While the Nazi commandant was warning about escaping, one man went berserk and ran towards the fence. He was immediately killed by a machine gun from the tower. In Gross-Rosen, the screening and selecting process was controlled by the camp doctor who looked us over like cattle. If he decided that you were fit for work, you were sent to a work camp. If not, you were sent to another camp for extermination. I was lucky. I was sent to a work camp. Before leaving Gross-Rosen, they shaved a band about an inch wide down the middle of our heads from the front to back. This was done so that if we escaped, we would be easily recognized. After a few weeks of suspenseful waiting in Gross-Rosen, I was finally sent to a working camp called Reichenbach. The working conditions were very difficult. We had to march about 8 miles to work. When we finally got to work, we were already half dead. I had to work in a city nearby building air raid shelters. Many times, American bombers would fly overhead, and the civilians would run for shelter. We had to stand exposed, because if anyone was caught running for shelter, he was immediately shot. After work, we had the long march back to camp. We were about 12 people in a group and had 2 guards with submachine guns behind us. Often, I had to help someone by putting his arms around my shoulders so that he would be able to make the last mile. If a person could not walk anymore and passed out, he was shot. I do not know what kept me going physically, but mentally it was a hope of seeing my family again and being free once more. Freedom was a forgotten memory, as if it had never existed. When we went to work, we had guards behind us. When we were walking around the camp, we had watchtowers all around us. If that was not enough, we also let big German shepherd dogs run loose to further deter our chances of escape. We were counted morning, noon, and night. Sometimes we would be called out at midnight for a count. There were a few who escaped from the camp, but after a few days, having no place to hide, they gave themselves up. Many people resigned themselves to the idea that they would never live through this, and those people did not last long. At first, they began to die mentally, and then, finally, their physical strength gave way. The food given by the Nazis was so meager. One meal consisted of bread only, and the other was some type of watered-down soup mixed with some vegetables. Many times, my hunger pains were so great that I even tried to eat some sawdust in order to have something in my stomach. After a few months of working in the city near Reichenbach, I was transferred to another job in the camp. One day, as I was working near a woman's compound, a woman called me over and handed me a piece of bread through the barbed wire fence. Somehow the guard caught me taking the bread and went to get a stick. It was a known fact that once you were beaten by a guard, the chances for survival were very slim. The guard took me aside, and I thought that the end had come for me. Just as he was about to raise the stick, he asked me how old I was. I told him I was 13 years old. He looked at me and told me to get back to work. It was indeed a lucky day for me. One evening, without warning, I was suddenly taken to an isolated area with other young people my age. There were about 15 of us in that group. When we arrived in Reichenbach, we said that we were older than we really were, because otherwise they would have sent us back to Auschwitz for extermination. Someone must have turned us in. I will never know who it was, but he must have received some extra food, special privileges. We were told that we were not useful for work anymore, and that in the morning we would be taken back to Auschwitz. For me, it felt like the end of the world. It was an indescribable feeling. The next morning, we were standing outside, waiting for the truck to take us to Auschwitz. Every time I heard the sound of a motor, I thought, this is it. I had never given up or lost my faith, but this morning was different. All of a sudden, the camp commandant came towards us and pointed his finger at us, saying, "You, go and join that group of workers." One of the men in a special group passed out, and they needed a fill-in because they already had completed the count. It is difficult to describe the joy that came over me, knowing that I would not be sent to an extermination camp. Shortly afterwards, a truck came and took the other children away. They were never heard of or seen again. As time went on, because of the great hunger pains, people started to steal food from each other. I remember one evening when I went to my room with my ration of bread that was supposed to last me all day. The lights suddenly went out, and my bread disappeared. These people were supposed to be my friends, but hunger knows no friendship. From that day on, I put my bread into my shirt as soon as I got it. One day the camp commandant found out about my age and decided that I was too young to be in a work group. So I was put into a separate camp people considered unfit for work. We all realized that something was going to happen to us, because as soon as you were put on a disabled list, it was only a matter of time before they shipped you to an extermination camp. Shortly afterwards, we were told that we would be shipped out of Reichenbach. We were put into half-open cattle trains. They kept filling up the train with more and more people. We wondered when it would stop. We were packed in so tightly that there was not room to move. We had to lean against each other standing up. Then the train started moving, and we were off to an unknown destination. Soon, a struggle started. Some people got weak and passed out. As soon as they did, they were trampled on, and before they could get up, they died. It was the first time I experienced such a struggle. It was everyone for himself. We were given one loaf of bread and no water. The first day, about 15 people died. Germans did not remove the dead. On the third day, the worst pain I experienced was from the lack of water. The thirst was so great that I used the urine from my body just to wet my lips. The torture of the journey seemed endless. Why were they doing this to us? Why didn't they just shoot us and end it quickly? After the 5th day, I got weak and passed out. When I came to, I felt someone sitting on me, and it felt like the life was oozing out of me. I could not move anywhere. It was not a painful feeling, but I did not want to give up and die. So with the last ounce of strength I had left, I pushed aside the man who was sitting on top of me, and in a bitter life and death struggle, I managed to stand up and hang on for life. Because the man who was sitting on top of me did not have the strength to stand up, he was trampled on, and shortly afterwards died. After I was liberated, I had many nightmares about this bitter and gruesome experience. When we traveled through a city, the German civilians stared at us as if we were some kind of animals. No one made an attempt to bring food or water. They just stared. I was so weak that I could not stand up anymore. Fortunately, it rained a little, and this saved my life. I had given up all hope of ever living through this ordeal. It was now the 6th day, and on of about 150 people who had started the trip, only 30 were still alive. It was a strange feeling, seeing a person die. One minute, you are talking to him, and all of a sudden, he stops talking and just stares at you. No pain, no emotional expression. You begin to accept death as a way of life. No one told us where we were going or how long the trip would last. Although I gave up the belief of being able to survive the ordeal, the will to live was very strong. It was now the 7th day. Only about 10 persons were alive. I was so weak, I didn't care anymore about what happened. I knew that wherever I was being sent, I would not be able to work, so my fate seemed certain. After the 8th day, we finally arrived at a camp unknown to me. Out of 150 people on that train, only 3 people were still alive. Barely. I was one of the 3. The Nazis assumed that everyone on the train was dead, so I was put on a wooden stretcher and carried to the crematorium for certain death. Just as I was about to be dumped into the crematorium, the inmates that were carrying the stretcher noticed that I was still alive. At the risk of their own lives, they hid me in a bathroom. Had the Gestapo caught them hiding me, they would have been put to death. From the bathroom, I was then smuggled into the barracks where I mixed with the other inmates. After a couple of days, I was on feet again and able to walk around a little. I found out that I was in Dachau. I could not figure out why we were being kept alive. We did not work. We were given food. Many died daily from malnutrition. Every morning, a wagon would come and pick up the people who died during the night. It was a routine chore for those people on that detail. One day, you would talk to a person about being liberated, and the next day, you saw him being dumped on that wagon like a piece of garbage. When I had time, I would reminisce, mostly about my village and my family, and how it would feel to be free again. For some people, survival was due to a strong belief in God. I remember when I was at the Reichenbach concentration camp, some people were so religious that while at work in the morning, they would quickly say a prayer. They would put on a yarmulke on their head so that they could pray before God. If caught, and many were, they were severely beaten, but this did not deter them. I could not understand how they could believe so strongly in God when they lived under such terrible conditions. But for many of them, prayer was a force that kept them alive and stimulated their will to survive. After 6 weeks at Dachau, I was again picked out of a group of people and again put on a train. After 2 days, we disembarked somewhere in the Tyrolean mountains of Austria. Altogether, we were about 700 people. Heavily guarded, we were told to start marching. We marched until dark. Then suddenly Germans opened up with machine guns. Those who could ran in every direction. I found a deep hole and jumped into it. The rattling of machine guns stopped, but I lay silently in the hole. It was now March of 1945, and it was snowing in the Tyrolean mountains. I slept all night in the hole. When I woke in the morning, it was covered with snow. My nose and legs were frostbitten. After I could straighten up, I started looking around to see where I was. I saw others wandering about. We were lost. We saw neither our guards nor our liberators. Those who were massacred the night before lay on the side of the road. We started walking towards the town in hope that it was liberated. Just before we got into town, we found ourselves again surrounded by German guards. They marched us into the mountains and after dark again disappeared. We were forced to march towards the front lines while the German army was retreating from the advancing American army. Shortly afterwards, we received a terrific pounding from American artillery and tanks. I kept saying to myself, if only I could make it through this night, I could finally be free. After the firing stopped, we wondered whether the German guards left us completely or if they were waiting somewhere in ambush. Then we understood why we had been forced to march into the mountains. The Germans were hoping that we would be killed by American firepower, and then they could say that the Americans did it. When morning came, I found myself in a small barn high up in the mountains with a group of about 15 people. On a road far below us, we saw vehicles moving, but we did not know whose they were. We were all hungry. Some of the men got together and told me if I went down the mountain and found out whose vehicles they were, they would share their food with me. I did not have much choice, since without food, I would not be able to hold out much longer. It was quite a suspenseful walk down the mountain. If those vehicles were German, I would go back to imprisonment. If not, I would finally be free. As I got closer, I could see that the vehicles were indeed American. I motioned for the other to come down the mountain. The Nazi terror machine was finally destroyed, and I was free again. It is hard for me to describe how it felt to be free again, to walk down the street without a machine gun behind my back. The road from hell to freedom was for me an eternity. Somehow, I survived. This journey is over. May you and your loved ones never have to make a journey like this in real life. Only you can prevent it from happening again.